We're in the second week of our series called Into the Unknown, and we're talking about change. And if there's one thing that's true about change, it's this: uncertainty. When we go through change, it's like walking right into the unknown. We just don't know what to expect. Oh, hello. We're in the second week of our series called Into the Unknown. We're talking about change. And if there's one thing that's true about change, it's this: uncertainty. When we go through change, it's like walking right into the unknown. We just don't know what to expect. Whether it's good or bad, life is full of unknowns and uncertainties and changes. Middle schoolers go through a ton of changes. Changes at home, changes at school, changes with your friends, changes on your team, changes in how you look, changes in what you believe. The list of changes you go through in these years is huge. Change is just one of those unavoidable parts of life. It's something we're always going to deal with, and that means it's something we want to learn to deal with well. That's what this series is going to help us do. Whether going into the unknown in our lives results in good changes or not so good changes, I think we can all agree that dealing with the changes that life throws our way isn't always easy. You know, your dad might get remarried and you get this really cool new stepmom. That's great. But it still means you have to adjust to a new person in the house. And that can be a difficult part of change. Or maybe you get moved to the starting lineup of your team. And that's awesome. Maybe that's something you've really wanted. But it still means now there's this new pressure that you have to deal with in being a leader on the team, in being a starter on the team. That can be a scary part of change. And those are just the positive changes. If changes like that can be difficult to deal with, what about the kinds of changes that aren't so good? What about the changes that we actually don't want? The kind that leave us wishing everything would just go back to the way that it was before. Maybe for you, it was a breakup with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and no matter how much you wanted to get back together with them, you just knew it wasn't going to happen. Or maybe you used to be the star in theater, and you've waited to audition for a particular role, but this year, someone else got the lead role. That's a change you might not want. There are other changes that are hard for us sometimes, like maybe your best friend chose a new friend group, or your other friends reject you or just consistently disappoint you. Those are changes in our social groups that we don't want. When something changes in a way that we don't want it to, it feels like something has fallen apart in our lives. And I don't know about you, but when that happens, I find myself thinking, I just want things to go back to the way they were. But what I've learned is that a lot of times in life, that's just not possible. Sometimes going into the unknown means that whatever it is that feels broken can't simply be fixed. And that can leave us feeling sad, angry, frustrated, and helpless. When you're going through changes like that, sometimes it feels like nothing else can be done. Maybe you've even wondered why God hasn't done something about it. And honestly, you find yourself feeling frustrated and disappointed. You're frustrated and disappointed with the change that is permanent in your life, and you're frustrated and disappointed with God, who seems to be doing nothing to help you through it. If you've ever felt like that, just know you're not the only one. Almost every person who's ever experienced difficult or painful changes in their lives has thought the same thing. That's why it's so important for us to know that while God hasn't promised to change everything to be the way that we want, God has promised us something else. And it's something that I think can help us when we're faced with going into the unknown in our lives. You know, a long time ago, there was a group of people who experienced a lot of changes in their lifetimes, and they were known as the Israelites. And what they lived through thousands of years ago is relevant to us because their experience plays a major role in our faith today. Their experience is largely documented in the Old Testament. It starts with a man named Abraham, and God created the nation, a group of people of Israel, in an area of the world that we now call the Middle East. It was out of that group of people that God would one day send Jesus into the world. So the nation of Israel was a big deal to God. But along the way, the Israelites went through a lot of struggles and unknowns and changes. And they made a lot of mistakes and missteps that got them into all kinds of trouble. Other nations would come and take them over and then capture them. And this happens over and over and over again. And you'd think that because they're God's chosen people that they would have it all figured out, that they wouldn't keep making these choices that get them in the trouble, that they would just learn to trust God, that they would know how to deal with the changes and the unknowns that they experienced on their journey. But remember, these people were just that, people. And like us, there were people who didn't always handle change well, because sometimes we don't handle change that well. So what did they do? Well, every time they found themselves in trouble, they did what a lot of us probably do. They asked God to fix it, to change it, to make things just go back to the way they were. And you know what? Sometimes God did, but a lot of times God didn't. But no matter what God did with the changes that the nation of Israel was dealing with, God always promised them something that they could hold on to as they walked into the unknown. And it's the same thing that God promises us today. Take a look at what we're going to read from the book of Isaiah. It says, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze." That's Isaiah chapter 43, verse 2. Now, first of all, I want you to pay attention to the way that that was worded. It says, when you pass through the waters, when you pass through the rivers, when you walk through the fire. It's not if, but when. In other words, this stuff is going to happen. Things are going to change. We are going to experience the unknown. We are going to find ourselves in difficult circumstances. That is a guarantee. But what's also a guarantee is what God promises us there. He says, when that happens, God promises to be with us through it. And because of that promise, we can be confident when things change. Now, I don't know if that's the type of promise that you were hoping for from God. Honestly, I sometimes kind of wish that God would have said something else. Something like, no matter how hurt you are, no matter how bad your situation is, I'm just going to come in and fix it. Every time if things get bad, I'll just come in and fix it. But that's not what God said. And that makes me think humbly that maybe God knows something that I don't. Maybe God knows that more than anything, we need to trust that when things go into the unknown in our lives, that God is with us. When change happens, and it will, God, who never changes, is with us. We can trust that God is always near, that God never leaves us, that He includes us when we are experiencing all kinds of change. That includes us when we're experiencing all kinds of change. And that's what I want you to remember today. God goes with you into the unknown. No matter what you are going through or what's happening at home, no matter how hurt you feel over what your friends did or how sad you are that life will never go back to the way it was, God goes with you into the unknowns. And if you think about it, that's a pretty amazing promise. Because when I'm hurting from the changes that life has brought me, the last thing I want to feel is alone. I want to know that someone is going to be in it with me. Sometimes just knowing someone is there for us can make us feel a lot better. And when that someone is God, that brings us peace. God does not promise us a life of ease, but He does bring us peace through His presence. You see, I think that God's presence with us is really the answer we need. When God finally fulfilled the promise to send Jesus into the world through the nation of Israel, one of Jesus' names was Emmanuel. Emmanuel means God with us. It was a name that would remind us that God is always with us. Jesus' life on earth was direct proof that God is always with us. While on earth, Jesus said something similar to God's promise in Isaiah. Listen to this. You can find this in the book of John. He said, "I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world." That's John chapter 16, verse 33. Jesus didn't shy away from the fact that we will face troubling changes. In fact, he guaranteed it. He said we'd go into the unknown throughout our lives, but he told us to take heart, which means have courage and remain strong, because he has overcome the world. And when we believe in and know Jesus, we can trust that he has got it covered. Knowing Jesus changes everything. See, there is no change that God can't handle. There are no unknowns we walk through without God by our side. God has made the promise to be with us and never leave us. And because of that, we can be confident when everything changes, knowing that the God of the universe hasn't left us to face it alone, because God goes with you into the unknown.